Hey, what's up, you guys? Bloody Jacob here to give you my thoughts on the new adaptation of Frankenstein, of course, developed and directed by Guillermo del Toro. And this just dropped onto Netflix a handful of days ago, as well as having a limited theatrical run, very limited theatrical run. I would have loved to have seen this in theaters, but was not playing any closer than across the state for me, and can't just casually do that all the time, unfortunately. So my wife and I had to settle for watching it when it dropped on Netflix, and very, very glad we did. It was a very, very good, wonderful movie overall. We're both pretty big Guillermo del Toro fans. Maybe her a little bit more specifically than me because she watched things like Pan's Labyrinth when she was younger and everything like that. I got into him more through something like Blade 2, kind of. The Hellboy movies were alright to me. He really hit something with me with his hand in the Strain TV series, which is a very overlooked show. I even really think Crimson Peak is pretty underrated. I love Jessica Chastain, and her role in that's awesome. Shape of Water a few years ago, different things like that. Pacific Rim over the years. And he just seems to be such a cool guy, a cool like artist. He actually cares about the craft, to work around and everything. And so for him to take on a classic tale like this was really interesting, and it was automatically one of our most anticipated movies of the year. And between this and what someone like Robert Eggers has done, one of my favorite filmmakers over the last decade or so, with something like Nosferatu last year, which I thought was a great film. It's nice to see like the gothic subgenre of horror kind of make a bit of a comeback. Of course, he and Del Toro are pretty different. He tends to lean more towards a bit of realism. There's stuff in his, of course, that goes beyond that, but his is a bit more kind of, grounded and grit, kind of. Whereas Del Toro's kind of tends to take more of like a fantasy approach to a point, a bit more, leaned into that otherworldly element to a point. But here, I think Del Toro found a very, very good middle, kind of a marriage and mesh of the two. And of course, it's based on Mary Shelley's novel, which I will not claim to be an expert on. But I have seen a lot of Frankenstein adaptations, and for my money and whatever my mouth is worth, not much. This is probably the best overall Frankenstein movie I've ever seen. And from what I can gather on my own, pretty damn close adaptation of the novel. Sure, he's changed things, he's omitted things, he's adjusted how things happen here and there and such, but I really think he's pretty dead on with kind of the essence and the meaning of the novel and the characters and such. Frankenstein isn't just some like, or just brood and that's it. There's a real thought and tragic side to the character and his creation and everything. And the movie's about 2.5 hours, and some people think it should be even longer than that. I think it was a good length, although I'm sure it probably could have gone for 3.5 if they had wanted to. But yeah, the movie is very, very good. The story structure of it is interesting with the first half or so, it's pretty much from Victor's perspective, played by Oscar Isaac. And that brings me to like a couple of nitpicks I have with the movie, and that's just, well, Oscar Isaac does well in the role. I do think he's a bit miscast as Victor Frankenstein. He feels a little bit out of place. But again, that's not to say he does a bad job or anything. And in that first half, I wasn't quite as into the movie. The opening is definitely something you see, the structure of it being set up by the creature still coming after him on the ship and everything, and then we hear kind of the story of what got them there from Victor's perspective, and then eventually the creatures. And Victor's side of it's very colorful. That's something Del Toro always does well, very visually pleasing. And that's my other like slight gripe though, is that some of the CG in it's a little verging on dodgy here and there. Like you can tell it's a background, but Del Toro obviously still put a lot of like art and effort into the looks of things, and some of it still looks just terrific too. So he definitely picked some good crew for that. There's some animals here that I think could look a bit better, but it's not enough to really take me out of the movie. But anyhow, the Victor Frankenstein portion of it feels at the time it felt kind of like lofty to me a bit, kind of, I don't want to say too optimistic or perky or anything like that, but kind of just a bit of a different vibe than I'd really want from a really in it ingrained Frankenstein story. But then you see how he handles when it goes to the creature's perspective, and I think it was purposeful that he did this. That he goes from like, oh, Frankenstein's arrogance and belief in himself as to what he's creating and trying to, prove wrong and prove right and stuff like that, through his own mind and his understanding of things. But then you see the creature side of it, and you get more of like the honesty and the harsher reality of what Frankenstein's exactly done, what Victor Frankenstein's exactly done here. And it's very thematically heavy with the creature's struggle, discovering the world and every end of humanity, essentially. Victor's mistreatment of him, and then him almost being destroyed and going off on his own and having to kind of see what his own place in the world could even be. And, kind of learning things as he would. And that brings me to Jacob Elordi. I guess Andrew Garfield was going to play the creature at one point, but that kind of fell through the cracks for scheduling or whatever. But Elordi, he's only done some independent rom-coms, maybe a couple thrillers. He did like Saltburn a couple years back. But man, not only was the makeup fucking fantastic and perfect on him, but he's still, a lot of it was still on him. The facial twitches, the his eyes and everything. He did a phenomenal job, I thought. Absolutely perfect in the part. You have Mia Goth here, who's definitely left her mark in recent years in the genre. I thought she'd kind of play more into it than she did, but she still definitely had a key bit to it. And it was still good to have her. She's definitely the most interesting before I started focusing on the creature more. You also have other notable actors in here like Charles Dance playing Victor's father. And I especially adored seeing David Bradley as this old man the creature meets in the woods with a small family and everything. And kind of what they learn from each other. Is really, really nicely written, perfectly acted. David Bradley, of course, playing Del Toro's Abraham Satrakian in the Strain TV show. So I really love the dynamic there. That was maybe my favorite part of the movie. But yeah, I thought it was very, very good. Definitely one of the top movies of the year for me, without question. Kind of like a lot of what Eggers has done. I don't mean to keep bringing him up, but just showing some genuine modern classics of the genre. I truly believe that. Not really anything else to complain about this movie. Just stunning, engrossing, both visually and from a character story standpoint. And anything else is just, like I said, nitpicks. Definitely please watch it. If I had to rate it out of 5 for Letterboxd, which I might write something about it for at some point, it's just a lot to put into words, let alone type. I'd probably give it between a 4 and a 5 out of 5, honestly, somewhere in there. 4.5, who knows. But yeah, follow me on Twitter, of course, TikTok, Instagram, and peace.